Like show up authentically, show up as yourself in your life. You don't necessarily have to be the most intelligent, the brightest, the smartest, but if you have a passion, be passionate about something.
Good morning, Zoe. How are you? And welcome to Strangers X.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Do you want me to call you Zainab or Tawanga?
You know what? I go by either name. So some people could refer to me as Zainab, others call me Taonga. Generally, my family call me Taonga. I guess for the sake of like strangers, and since probably most people will probably know me here as Zainab, so for consistency, it would probably be better to just refer to me as Zainab. Personally, I really don't mind if you refer to me as Taonga. So if that is what comes naturally to you, please refer to me as Taonga. That's fine because they're both my names. I don't really have like a first name, second name. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense because so my first name is Takudzwa. Yeah, my first name is Takudzwa, and mostly my family call me Takudzwa. But I feel like there was a point, I know when I was like 12, 13,
hmm?
everyone started calling me Zoe. So I used to be Zoe in school, Takudzwa like
Oh,
to my family, friends, home, yeah. But at some point, everyone just started calling me Zoe. So
yeah.
one thing I really hate is people mispronouncing my name. So
Yeah.
I'm like, just call me Zoe.
You know what? Actually, let's stay on this because when you have two names and where they're not defined first and second name, you hold importance for both names. And so navigating that, like when you're introducing yourself, like how do I introduce myself, especially in social settings? I don't know, maybe it's just an African thing where our parents will present one particular name, usually our non-African name, as like the school name or the official name that we use in official space,
Mhm.
which is essentially what they do, right, when you go to school. But then at
Yeah,
home,
yeah, yeah.
they will call us another name. And so, like, what kind of, I don't know, like, what kind of messaging does that bring? Does that give you as a child or as a person growing up?
No, it's super interesting. I was actually speaking to someone earlier this week, reflecting on my time here in South Africa and kind of feeling like I'm a part of the place, but I'm not a part of the place at the same time. About like how I view myself and how others view me.
Hmm?
Because if someone here asks me where I'm from, I'll say I'm from Zimbabwe.
Mm,
But then um there's this kind of, I feel like an African. I am an African, I am a Black woman, but then I also have a worldview from Ireland. So I
yeah.
have this kind of European perspective that sometimes I feel like I belong and I don't really belong at the same time. So even like what you were saying about the names, it's very interesting because how you like your name is how you identify in the world or how you present yourself, and it says certain things about yourself. So I guess I can start from the start. I was born in Zimbabwe. I was born in Harare, Zimbabwe. I grew up in a township called Chitungwiza for the first, I think, 2, 3 years of my life. My parents were teachers. They actually met at a teacher training college in Mutare and then started teaching in Harare. And yeah, so growing up, like I spoke Shona. That's like one of the major languages in Zimbabwe. I love to speak Shona. I was very cheeky, very outgoing. Like I spoke to elderly people, young people as the same. Like I was very like an informal, very laid back child. And so my parents came to Ireland, I think when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and left me and my younger brother, who was one at the time, with our grandparents.
Mhm.
And
Wait,
we
so
grew up like,
you moved to Ireland with your grandparents?
no, no, no. So my parents
Uh,
went to Ireland
okay.
first and then left me and my brother, like they wanted to
Yes.
establish themselves and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up with like my cousins. They were also at my grandparents' house. It was like there was like six of us with my grandparents. It
Uh,
was
yeah.
it was an amazing time. So we were there for like the year. And then one morning, we were having like breakfast, like eating porridge or whatever. And then my grandmother was like, "Oh, your dad is here. He's coming to take you to Ireland." And like I had no concept or no sense of what is this place? Where am I going kind of thing. I remember like I had to say goodbye to like my creche or my or kindergarten, whatever, goodbye to my teachers, my friends, and I was crying so much. Like I really remember hating speaking English. Like
Mm.
I didn't like to speak English. I hated it. Like it was like the worst thing you could make me do.
Is it when you were still in
When I was like
Zimbabwe or when you first moved to Ireland?
when I was still in Zimbabwe. I
Mm.
did not enjoy speaking English. I didn't feel free speaking English. Felt like I couldn't express myself. So,
Hmm.
um,
What is it? Do you know what? Do you know what? Like, was it just because we often have a language in which we feel most comfortable in, especially in terms of being vulnerable and communicating? Is it because of that? Like, what was it?
to be honest, I yeah, probably was all those things, but I can't really identify what the feeling was when I was 5. But I just didn't feel comfortable. It's like it's not something I'm familiar with. Probably I wasn't good at it. Do you know that kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Whereas, in your own language, you feel free, you feel
true,
like
true, true, true.
you can say what you want to say.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that kind of I think it's an internal conflict to Ireland. So I have an interesting story about our journey to Ireland. So I didn't have my brother and we didn't have passports
Yes.
like at the time when my dad came to take us. So
Okay.
he did an emergency passport
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
And we were flying, I suppose, from Harare to OR Tambo and then
Connecting.
I don't know, to Ireland. I don't know how we did it. But at the airport, at OR Tambo Airport, they wouldn't let us pass,
Oh
my
no.
brother and I,
Is
because
it?
we didn't have passports.
Wait, so did you
Yeah,
guys have like a travel, what's it called? A travel document?
exactly. So we had a
A piece of
travel
paper.
document, but apparently, yeah, it wasn't signed or something was missing from it. And they were like you have to go back to Zimbabwe and get this signed and come back. And then obviously if you've like saved up for these flights, like you don't have money to have
And you
other
had two
flights.
kids with you. Like this is a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. I can only imagine the stress of like trying to keep calm, but also you're in transit. Like he's not even in Zimbabwe. You can easily just be like, okay, let's turn back home, you know? Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, in terms of like for me as well, when I first had to move from like when I moved to South Africa from Zambia, I was 8, but like I haven't even said goodbye to my school friends. Like my whole world is here, and I've always been a social butterfly. So it was like, what do you mean I have friends? The concern wasn't like whether or not I would make friends because I've always just been like I can always go into any space and make friends. But it was almost just like, wait, like no warning, but it was like almost like this great adventure, you know? But just again, like those, those push and pull of clearly I'm going to be experiencing a new culture and a new experience, etc. But yeah, so that's like really fascinating. And then just like the travels of like, this whole thing of like travel documents and just the difficulty of our home affairs. Do you guys call it home affairs in Zimbabwe? The department or ministry that
I
deals.
guess I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
So what I wanted to say is that what ended up happening is there was a stalemate, and we ended up sleeping at OR Tambo Airport for 3 days.
no way.
My dad, me, and my brother. We ended
What?
up sleeping at the airport because I think my dad had to send the document or fax it back to them, get it
Yes.
signed. And there was this like is it like not an air hostess, but someone that works at the airport, like
Mhm.
she would bring us food. Do
Yeah.
you know when you're like past security? So you're like you can't
Yes, yes,
turn
yes.
back. You're just like you're
Oh,
in
wait.
limbo.
No way.
So
So you
we were
had
literally
past security. Wow.
like at the is it the check-in
The
desk?
immigration check-in, basically, that's where you were stopped,
Like,
right?
do you know the desk where they check your passport, your tickets for you to board the
Yes,
plane?
yes, 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 yes.
That's where we were sleeping. Like we didn't go back. We stayed for 3 days. And
No.
this woman would bring us like snacks and food and stuff. And it was insane. And
How
then
was
we
it
I
though in
guess
the
we went.
moment as like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old? Like, did you understand what was going on?
No, I didn't understand what was going on. I feel like the older I get, the fainter the memories become. But we were literally like sleeping on the floor, like in the midst of the chairs with
Oh,
our like hand luggage.
yes.
Um, And yeah, my dad always says that in the midst of that, he was like stressed, and he says that I said, "Don't worry, Dad, God will take care of us."
Oh, wow, oh man, amen, amen. Wow.
Yeah. So we ended up, everything was sorted. We ended up flying,
Yes.
and Air France lost our suitcases.
Could this story
So
get, wait, when you arrived in Ireland?
when we arrived, our baggage went missing, and it's never been recovered. So that does a number of things, because in those suitcases was like my photos from Zimbabwe when I was a child, family albums, um, like clothes. So do you know what's crazy, Zainab? For the longest time, I thought I was adopted
Why?
because I had no frame. I never saw pictures of myself because they were lost.
Yes, yes. Wow.
I don't know if in the real sense I believed I was adopted, because me and my dad, we looked exactly alike. But
Yes.
this sense of like
I
no
think this
sense
is
of
forgotten.
location,
Yes.
or
Mhm.
yeah, like you don't have a sense of like connection with where you grew up. Like all the photos, all the family albums from my first few years in Zim, like they're gone.
You did have a sense of connection to Zimbabwe or Ireland?
To Zimbabwe. I didn't have a sense of connection basically to myself as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the older I grew up in Ireland, the more fainter the memories of back home became. And obviously, if you have a photo or an album, you can be like,
Mhm.
oh, it can
Yes.
re-trigger a memory or something. But I had kind of like nothing to hold on to
Yeah, yeah. No
in
reference.
losing that luggage. Yeah. But the older I got, I realized like there's some photos in my grandmother's house, in my dad's village, like my aunts, my uncles, they have things, but the majority of our stuff got lost. So that was very unfortunate.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it was a very tumultuous trip.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's
Mm.
fascinating because I can imagine that almost as much as maybe in the moment it doesn't feel that way. Do you think that it almost sets the tone of your experience of being like a migrant in Ireland, or like an African in the diaspora, growing up as first generation of this
Oh,
limbo, of
absolutely.
this, like often, like you said, when your feeling that you have, the sense that you have even being here in Cape Town, of despite identifying and knowing, and of course, that you're a Black woman, you're an African woman, but also feel that feeling of belonging and belonging. Do you think that also, that experience, that travel experience, also added to your experience of growing up in Ireland?
No, definitely. I think it did. I think it was like a sense of like you're just ripped out of somewhere, and then you wake up in a different place.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're trying to be like, where am I? What am I doing? It was very disorienting, like very strange. I remember my first day in primary school. And I remember my teacher asking me like, "Oh, are you Nigerian?" And I was like, "No, I'm Zimbabwean." At that point, I didn't even know what a Nigerian was, but it's the fact that she identified me as something that I'm not. I
And also
was like,
immediately assuming
you know,
that you're from here, right?
say that again?
It was also highlighted to your young child and young man, already saying that, wow, when people look at me, people automatically know that I'm not from here.
Yes, it
You
was
know?
that. But then also the fact that you're misidentifying me.
Mm.
And at that point, I didn't know anything about like any other country. I just knew Zimbabwe. So I was like, okay, first of all, you're highlighting I'm not from here, but secondly, you're displacing me in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
No,
I
absolutely,
was like,
absolutely. And we could rationalize as adults of like, oh, it's probably because there are more Nigerian migrants in islands, and so people automatically just always assume like, you're probably Nigerian. And so people maybe at the time hadn't heard of Zimbabwe, or also
yeah, yeah, yeah.
grew up in a big town or small town where what was how were the demographics?
Okay, so I grew up in a town of about 40,000 people.
Small.
So it's called Drogheda. Yeah, so I was the only Black person in my class when I first joined, say a class of 30.
Mhm.
And then obviously, so another thing is like with teaching, I never saw like a black teacher
Mhm.
in primary school or even secondary school. And yeah, I never saw. So it was normal. Like
Okay.
I got to understand that this isn't my country. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm a minority. Why would I expect to
Mhm.
see someone that looks like me?
True, true.
I'm not from here, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So um
But how did you like relate with your classmates, your friends on the playground? Like how was that? And how did your teachers and the adults in your space growing up, how did you relate with them? How did they relate with you as Zoe and being this different person? Was it an issue? Was it a thing? Was it not?
I don't think it was a thing. Even like the story I'm telling you about the first day of school. I remember my mom dropping me in the class and then leaving, and I was crying so much. And this little ginger girl,
Yes.
her name is Lauren. She came to me and she was like, "Oh, do you want to play?" And she got like a jigsaw puzzle, and we ended
Yes.
up playing and stuff. And there was never any like a sense of like racism. I think there was curiosity, like people wondering, like, "Oh, why did you come here?"
Yes.
I remember, I guess it would be like, I know, grade seven, grade eight, like people asking me in school, like, oh, are you a refugee? Are you an asylum seeker? Like, is there war in your country?
Mm.
And I was like, no. So I later understood that my parents were essentially economic migrants.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, so yeah, like teachers weren't earning a lot at that time, and the politics were starting to get worse. So they kind of got out when they could.
Yeah.
But it was just this sense of all immigrants are like monolithic, or like they have the same experience of like war torn, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Poverty
Yeah.
stricken. So I always wanted to set the record straight that like it's a story for a lot of people. It's a lot of people's reality, but it's not mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So no, no, please go
I was gonna
ahead.
say in terms of like how people related to me, there wasn't a sense of like, oh, bullying or something, but just trying to understand.
Yes. Curiosity.
So, oh, trying to, yeah, set the record straight kind of thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I liked what you said about and I guess maybe it's quite telling. A lot of people who travel or spend time in Ireland often say this that the experience is often one that isn't as antagonistic as other places in the West, you know, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't know, like, did you think that it's part of just as a result of the history that Ireland also has in terms of the grander scheme of Great Britain and Europe? Do you think that it almost reminds me of like how you had to again, you know, correct people like, no, I'm not Nigerian, I'm Zimbabwean. But I think that's the nature of it. I think like that was part of the reason of why strangers came to be, is that we often look at people and we make these judgments and assumptions of them based off of what we know, and we just project of like, oh, so that should, because you look like this and you tick these particular boxes, therefore this is your story, this is who you are, this is what you stand for, right? And
Absolutely.
without even without even having a conversation, without even, you know, at least, or beginning from a place of curiosity first before assuming, we often prevent ourselves from truth, from even learning, you know, and I think that that's also part of like just losing the art of conversation. So
Mm,
thank you for sharing these stories. Automatically, people, you know, not necessarily from a malicious point of view, right? People,
no, no, no.
I think it's almost like it's human nature to not to come across as someone who doesn't know, as being ignorant. So I will ask a question by framing it as though I already know the answer. Hence, instead of asking, "Hey, so where are you from? Where are you from?" You know, I'll say, "Oh, you're Nigerian, right? Oh, you know, I was there
Mm,
back home, or are you a refugee?" Instead of simply asking, "Oh, like what? Why did you move to Ireland?" Right? And so just I think these experiences, and of course, it's received differently on the other end. And so not that
yeah,
even aside it's not malicious or there's no ill intent, although there are moments where they may be ill intent. I think just like learning how to be curious, and that it's okay to be curious. It's okay to ask questions. Obviously, just having
yeah.
wisdom and just be be respectful, right? Ask people like, hey,
That is
I'll
true.
ask you a few questions. I don't know, like, do you think that perhaps would have changed those encounters or just in general?
Absolutely. Like even as you're speaking, it's just dawning to me that I feel like I've spent a lot of my life explaining myself. I think that is like that's the journey of someone who grows up in like two different cultures or even in the diaspora. Like it's you always have to explain yourself.
Mm.
And I've had a lot of experiences back home where someone asks me where I'm from, like an Irish person, a white Irish person, and I say, "Oh, I'm from Drogheda, like my hometown where I grew
Yes.
up." And they say, "No, where are you really from?" So that means that what my explanation isn't good enough. It
Yes.
doesn't satisfy you enough.
Yes. Yes.
So you need to understand where I'm really from.
Mm.
And then I say I'm from Zimbabwe, and then they're like, oh, okay. So that makes sense to them, but me being from Drogheda doesn't make sense. And it's interesting because depending on who asks me where I'm from, I say different things.
Mm.
Because sometimes I feel like there's a different intention or a different motive behind your question.
Yes.
So if an Irish person asks me where I'm from, I'll say, oh, I'm from Drogheda. But if someone like here in South Africa, people have been asking me where I'm from, I'll say I'm from Zimbabwe. Um, I don't know why I do that, but I don't know. It depend. I like locate myself differently dependent on who asks, because I always feel like I have to explain my being, explain why I am, why
Yep.
I talk the way I talk, why I look the way I look. It's like I
It's
don't know, just feeling misunderstood or unknown or being mysterious. It's very exhausting.
And
I
also
think it's
it creates a
exhausting.
dissonance, I can imagine, like, within you, right? Like, I can totally relate as well. My response will often be different in terms of like when people ask me where I'm from. It's not a lie because where I'm from means different things. It's like, what do you mean? Where do I live? My ancestral home, where is home? And home isn't necessarily also one place, right? Like home is both, I don't want to speak for you. Like for me, home is both Zambia and Pietermaritzburg and South Africa. Like they're very much both home. They both have formed make up form my identity. But for some reason you're forced as an individual, we're forced as individuals to only identify with one place and only be, which is so untrue because like even if you live in one country, let's say you are from a popular thing, right? You came in from Maritzburg or you came in from KZN and then you grow up, your parents move to Johannesburg, to the big city or Cape Town, and you
Mhm.
grow up there. So when people ask you where you're from, are you gonna say it's you can easily say, oh, I'm from Joburg. Or you can say I'm from, Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal, right? And it's just like why is that accepted? Those that you can belong to different places. Um,
Yeah.
and yet, and I think, and also I think these questions are often reserved only for certain people. So, and so that like I'm trying to get to the heart of that, of like, and also making it okay to, and to normalize, I think for people like yourself and I, who have these, um, tapestry or geographies of belonging and
That's
almost like
nice.
healing our
Tapestry.
inner child. Yeah, healing the inner child within us who often had these questions and conflicts and emotions that you couldn't even necessarily articulate at some point. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think just like going back to like you said about your experience, like just being in Cape Town, belonging and unbelonging. Town, what are you doing in Cape Town?
What am I doing in Cape Town? So I came to Cape Town, is it 6, 7 months ago? So March. So I am a PhD student at the University of Westminster in the UK. I'm part of the law school, and my research is into tenure security in the former homelands, specifically women's rights, how they access their land rights. And I came to do data collection. So I've been doing qualitative interviews with lawyers, with community organizations, with small scale farmers, with civil society, basically, different stakeholders in land administration, land governance, to kind of understand like the differing interests people have in land and how those inform, how they hinder or enhance women's access of their land rights. Um, so one thing I was very uncomfortable with was writing from the UK about a place that I've never been to.
Yes.
I think there's so much you can see in the literature, but there's something about being in the society in which you're writing about.
Topic, like what led you into looking into land tenure, land security, and specifically as it pertains to women's rights and
Okay,
acquiring tenure?
so I started this research from land expropriation without compensation. So during my master's, that's what my dissertation was on, about
Okay.
this phenomena that was uprising. I think the EFF really led the charge on that in
Mhm.
Parliament, calling for the Section 25 of the Constitution to be amended in the
Yes.
property clause for land expropriation without compensation. So I really wanted to evaluate what would that mean. Is there no, provision for that already? Why does it have to be changed, kind of be implemented, and what it would mean in terms of international obligations and treaties South Africa has signed up to, and like international law as well. So in that context, I wrote on that. So that was a 20,000 word dissertation, and I thought, this is something that can, I can do at PhD level. So when I started my PhD, I really based my thesis on this idea of transformative constitutionalism, that
Yes.
constitutions have the power to change societies.
Mhm.
And looking at the history of South Africa, colonialism, apartheid, where the country came from and where it's headed, the potential of the constitution to push social change and social transformation and things like that. And then looking at, you know, the what this constitution is heralded to be or purported to be, and the reality on the ground.
Mhm.
So I think I started my PhD very much like championing like the Constitution is the best thing ever. Look at all this equality and non-racialism, all this stuff. But the more I read into it, I saw like the limits, even the compromise in a lot
Yes.
of cases,
Mhm.
especially to do with the economy of the nation, to do
Mhm.
with land, to do with the
Mhm.
means of production and stuff like
Yes.
that. I think I saw in 2017 land audits that like, I don't know the exact figures, but like 81% of the land belongs to 7% of the population or something
Yeah.
like that.
Mhm.
So that was in my digging into why land needs to be redistributed or why land should be in the
Yes.
hands of the state. So the issue with land expropriation without compensation is that it was very much a hot topic at the time.
Yes.
And it was very, I don't know, it was very hard to track where things were going.
Mhm.
I felt like in order to do a project that could be finished in 3 years, I needed to
Yes.
focus on a much narrower aspect of land.
True.
So the land reform system, I don't know if you know, consists of three pillars. So
Mhm.
it's redistribution, restitution, and tenure security. So I was
Yes.
looking at these three, and my project would have focused on redistribution. I wrote on that during my master's. So I looked into tenure security and I found that it is one of the least developed pillars of the land reform program
Wow. Wow.
in South Africa. For example, there is no permanent legislation for
On.
secure tenure.
Mhm.
Um, and there's an interim that's renewed every single year called IPILRA.
Yeah.
Uh
So
yeah, so
IPURA is interim protection of informal land rights.
mhm,
Mhm.
exactly. So I was looking at something, a gap
Mhm.
in the land reform program, and I found that tenure security is that gap. And then I wanted to focus specifically on gender and women's rights because, um, I feel like the racial stuff is covered very well, but the focus on like the relationship between gender and land is less in focus, and also the intersecting identities of being in the rural areas where some of the poorest people live. So being poor, being African, being a woman, how these affect your access to your land rights. And then also this idea of the former homelands, which were essentially states within a state.
Yes.
They were official countries, they were independent.
Because people there were not citizens of South Africa, right?
Exactly. And how that is still perpetuated today. Obviously, there's no homeland anymore, but how the legacy of that segregation is still perpetuated today. Yeah, so these are like all the things that I'm kind of thinking of and writing about. And
yeah. I mean, I'm actually shocked that redistribution is the most neglected of the three pillars. Tenure security, sorry, is the most neglected of the three pillars. Would you mind sharing which one of the three is the one that's most focused on?
I think the one that probably has a lot is probably redistribution or restitution. So restitution is that anyone who is deprived of land, I think by 1913 they can have a claim to get it restituted. So there's like a lot of claims, and there's this like immense backlog from like decades, and they extended the date. I think initially it was supposed to be by 1999 or something. You're supposed to put in a land claim, but because there were so many people, they extended it, and there's such a backlog of people. And then redistribution is obviously like the land that we have, distributing it to the poorest people, the people that need land. So it's, I want to.
Would this be land that is held by the state, or just in general between both the privately and publicly owned land?
So yeah, this is the question. With expropriation without compensation is that they want all land to be in control of the state, whereas right now they're not in control of the state. So the thing with secure tenure is that a lot of people in the former homelands, they have informal rights.
So just back up. What is secure? Just for our listeners, what is security tenure? Sorry, I was going.
I wanted to bring up I want to read the actual
definition.
The actual constitution, where it's found in the constitution.
Section
give me a second. Yeah. Section 25, subsection 6. A person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled to the extent provided by an act of parliament either to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. So the Constitution, mandates that there is an act that allows for people's tenures to be secure. So tenure refers to access to land or the use of land, that it is secure. So you find that many pieces of land in the former homelands, they have there's mixed uses or mixed access. You may have access to graze, to have a residential home, to do different things on it. So basically secure tenure is that person, their access isn't, isn't volatile. Like they know that they can wake up tomorrow and be able to access that piece of land. They can use that piece of land for what they need to use it for. So what you find, it is secure. It's not going to be taken away from them. So what you find is that in the former homelands, people have informal rights to the land, but these rights, they're not registered anywhere, they're not codified anywhere. Oftentimes it will be, the chief knows about it or has a record, but there is no system of recording and documenting who has a right to do what on which piece of land. So what I also look at is customary law and how that influences what people can do on the land. And you see that patriarchy also influences
Of course.
Especially with women's rights to land, they are seen as minors. They're seen as people that cannot make decisions on the land. So it would always be like the male of the family or something like that. They have the right in land, especially if you're not married, if you're a single woman, for single female-headed households as well. So I'm trying to look at what does that mean to, their future, to their self-determination, to being able to provide for their families. Yeah, so that's what.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, this is incredible and powerful stuff. I think, a lot of people would probably relate to this, in the sense that, the majority of South Africans were, before 1994, were lived in the former homelands, right? And so generally, and so by extension, is that most people who were landowners in these homelands. And so there is very little, and we're saying that it's 2024 and there's still very poor tenure security in place in those areas. Of course, people have migrated to the urban city, and people have acquired land, but not at the same rate, and it's not the same number of people. I mean, not as many people have actually own land in the city, where land rights and the land tenure regime is more secure in the urban area. So what does that mean for South Africans? What does it mean for most South Africans when for most homeowners, we can safely say most homeowners do not have secure land tenure. And if we even take it further down, that you're saying, women are even more vulnerable, as you have all these the systems at play of patriarchy, of cultural norms that prevent women from accessing land tenure security. So, I know I don't want us to go in necessarily in depth. I think that would almost require, and I'd love for you to come back once you're done and you've submitted your research to just chat about that. What is the road to impact, right? You said that, the beginning of this journey, before you began, for you, this was, as your supervisor said, this is a PhD. You're not an activist, you're a PhD. But I get the sense that this is very much also activist work that you're doing, that you want this research to lead to practical impact. What is that? What is that impact that you're looking for at the end of it? Like, what do you want to do? What do you want? What does the best result that could come out of this research look like?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess I want to contribute to, documenting, some of the experiences of people in the former homelands. You know that it's home to, I think it's 18 million South Africans live in the former Bantustan. So this is the majority of the population. Um, so even in like going around and speaking to people and things like that, I want to document. I think, history is very important, and also where we came from and where we're going. To be able to, put a stop to something, or to end a stop to something, you need to understand the roots of the thing. And then another thing that I really enjoy is sociology. I've been finding that I was telling my housemate yesterday that I think I should have been a sociologist, because really the work I'm doing is law in society. How do these
Yes.
laws play out? How are they applied practically
Mm,
in society? So I think the most obvious thing is that we need a permanent legislation for secure tenure,
true.
because the Constitution demands that there is an act that addresses that, and there is no
Why
act.
isn't there one?
A good
Why are we yet to
question.
have one?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there have been a few attempts, like Clara, that was found to be
Yes.
unconstitutional.
Hmm.
But even an appeal right to be made permanent or to be strengthened, there needs to be some sort of backstop. Um, and I think there needs to be a system of documenting
Hmm.
people's rights.
Yes.
Another thing would be this idea of traditional leadership. What
Hmm.
does it mean for the people that live in those areas?
Yes.
Are they citizens, or are they subject to a chief or to a king?
Mm.
Um, Did you hear about the Ingonyama Trust case?
Yes, the trust case, yes. But could you please explain to our audience what's happening?
So there was a case where it was found that people in KZN were paying residential levies
Mm-hmm.
to live on land that
Yes.
they own, they
Locals,
have
essentially.
rights
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And it was found to be unconstitutional that they were paying these things. And
It's
if you
essentially
were to,
levies.
yeah, it levies. And if you were to protest, you wouldn't get things such as like proof of residence if you wanted
Yeah.
to open a bank, if you wanted to do things. So you were basically forced into paying for what is rightfully yours, what you own.
Yeah.
And this thing of corruption and power. Um,
And this is
so
able to occur because of this security in this tenure insecurity, right? Because if you can prove that, hey, I have ownership of this land, no one will be able to charge you these, these unfounded levies, because that should only come from the state, from the government. But here we are.
exactly,
This is what is happening, and so we have a vulnerable population who are being made even more vulnerable as a result
exactly.
of lack of regulation.
Yeah, so the word I was looking for earlier is precarious.
Mm,
People's rights in the former homelands are very precarious.
yeah.
And I think coming to like the Western Cape and being here and even comparing it to like urban, you
Hmm.
see that there is almost two different systems, land administration systems happening in South Africa. Um, Also, like beyond that, it's just like there's two different realities for people in
Hmm.
South Africa as well. But just to have a sort of uniformalization, is that a word? Like a
Yes.
system that is able to record people's rights,
Hmm.
and to do away with, these colonial practices and things like that. Even like permission to occupy certificates. A lot of people say maybe title deeds are the answer. They're not necessarily the answer because the Constitution says that customary law is equal
To
standing to,
common law.
common law. So it's not about replacing customary rights or informal rights with the title deed. It's also the question of, is it really equal? What does it mean to say it is equal? So
Exactly.
there's so many questions in this
Mm.
to unpack and to understand.
How do you, yeah, I was going to say, it's like the question that as a law student, of how do you say that customary law is equal to the common law and then still say, oh, the Constitution is the superior law of the land, but the Constitution is by and large a liberal common law document, you know, and so these tensions arise, and as a result of that, I
Yeah,
think. And I guess, like, it's both it's incredible and it's great that we have a pluralistic legal system that recognizes different legal systems, like the different legal systems that exist in South Africa. But for the average person who's just living, who has no interest or even awareness of these complexities of just the legal system, the practical effects of what the law does is very, very important. And so when you do not regulate tenure security for someone, like, like the people in KZN who are being charged by the Ingonyama Trust, what does that mean? If I mean, it doesn't help them when you come and tell them that, listen, we're trying to both protect your customary rights as well as, your common law rights. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm still being, I'm left in this precarious position. And then, you earlier on, you referred to transformative constitutionalism. You're working towards a particular society, right? A society
mhm,
that that an equitable society for all. So what does it mean then for this constitutional project, this transformative constitutional project, where where we have these precarious people and who form the majority of the population? What does that mean?
yeah,
I guess these are the questions I think I'd love for us to come back and have a listen to. I know we've spoken about like so many things today, and I think like that requires like its own sit down, and
it's a
that's why I'd
lot.
really love to hear and chat to you about that at the end of it. And I guess I mean, I think I wanted to ask this earlier, of like, what led you even like choosing your master's topic on land expropriation without compensation, and then which led you to this tenure security topic with your PhD. Would you say, like, part of just Zimbabwe's history itself with like land distribution and expropriation, did that also inform your gravitation towards the topic? Because I mean, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm sure even the audience are just like, you're all the way in Ireland, you're all the way in in London, in the UK, and here you are talking about the EFF, what is happening in South Africa about land expropriation, that compensation. Like, what made you as a law student in the UK, see this and be like, I want to write a master's dissertation on this. I want to write a PhD topic on this. Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. I think for me, it goes back to, I think a lot of it stems from like my father. So even growing up in Ireland, my dad is always watching politics. He is always, listening to some sort of debate or keeping up to track with Zimbabwean politics. And he would always, tell stories of Zimbabwe and independence. So he was born in the 70s. So he was very young when he was 10 when independence in Zimbabwe happened. But he talks about growing up in the villages and the freedom fighters and the guerrillas like passing through his town. And, he talks about how his primary school or secondary school was bombed and he couldn't go to school for like a few years.
Wow, yes.
So the independence struggle. So he actually grew up really around it, and as a rural boy, he would wake up early to lead the cows out to graze, go to school, get them back. So he came from very much like a farming background, and I think that always instilled in me an interest in Zimbabwean history, Zimbabwean politics. This idea of imperialism, colonialism, and what that
Yes.
that meant. I remember even in secondary school doing history projects on Zimbabwe, and as I into my teens, I started following South African Parliament, mostly for its comedy. Like you knew something funny was going to happen because of the economic freedom fighters. And I think the first big thing for me was the Nkandla scandal and pay back the money.
Yes.
And this whole thing of state capture. I followed that like really closely when the public prosecutor, released that report of state
Yes.
capture and stuff like that. And then this land expropriation thing. And I felt like every time the EFF brought something up, like they would end up being thrown out by bodyguards or this commotion to shut them down. And I really wanted to understand like what is it they're trying to say?
Yes.
Beyond being disruptive, beyond being radical, beyond being ungovernable and all those things, like what are they, trying to say? So I really went into, their manifesto and reading, thinkers and stuff that align with socialism and stuff like that to really understand the topic. And I think even like the Freedom Charter,
Yes.
because I write what I like, Gukai Toby's The Land is Ours. I started reading a lot of things on Black Skin, White Masks, I think it's called.
Yes.
So I wasn't academically trained this way. It's like I taught myself.
Yeah, self-taught.
Yeah, self-taught. I would buy like Edward Said's Orientalism, like learning about post-colonialism, neo-colonialism. Like I would like look for these things online, and because that's not what my educational background is about at all. So I think just wanting to contribute something to that.
Yes.
And then just this innate sense of like human rights and fairness and justice, and even looking at the statistics, I'm like, this isn't right, this isn't fair. How does a minority still, have so much control over a majority? And I think growing up as a Zimbabwean, I've always heard of South Africa as this like amazing place, a beacon of hope in Africa.
Mhm.
So then just looking at the reality of it being like the country of with the most inequality and stuff. So I'm trying to settle these things in my mind, what I've been told, and then the reality. So I think in the law, because a constitution is a legal document essentially. So I'm like, in the law, do these things accommodate? How do they settle? How do they match up? And I think for me, my PhD is also a thing of trying to understand myself. As we were talking at the beginning about the sense of belonging, um, in terms of is does South Africa belong to Black people? Does South Africa belong to Africans? This sense
Oh,
of I've been reading a book by Mbuso Nkosi, and he talks about this ontological nowhereness, like
yes.
where do Africans belong? Like the sense that land connects us. There's a spiritual connection to land. Beyond economic, beyond productivity, like
Yes.
land means way more. Um,
Yes.
so even in my own thing of like identity and belonging, I think is also coming out in my work as well.
Oh my gosh, I love Mbuso. And I was literally reflecting on that this morning as I was just thinking about our conversation today. I was like, oh, Zoe's doing land tenure. And it took me back to what year was that? I think it was 2015. I was a part of so I did my first degree, my first degree at Rhodes University. Well, the university currently known as Rhodes University. The department was hosting the South African Sociology Association like conference. And so I remember there was like this presentation that I attended on on land tenure and land security. And actually, Prof. Mtebeza was actually there. He was in that session, and there was this like third student, and I believe it's Mbuso. I stand to be corrected.
Wow.
And at the time, I think he was doing his master's. I don't think it was based in the Northwest. And he spoke of this concept, right? Of like where do we belong as Africans, as spiritually, like where do we go to get buried if we do not own land? And it blew my young mind. Because we as Africans, we're very much spiritual people. We very much always have I wanted to touch on this as well, like we're very much people of faith. If like faith plays a huge part of our lives, right? And also belonging and plays a big part of culture and of just like our viewpoint and how we see ourselves. How do you go and get buried in land that you do not own, that does not recognize you? Where do we go and bury our umbilical cords? As Africans, there's this African practice of like when a child is born, you bury the umbilical cord once it falls off in the ancestral land or like where they are born. And so if you do not have that land to do so, you're almost in limbo. You are in this precarious position from the moment you are born, just in terms of, metaphorically or metaphysically. Um, and so what does that mean? Yeah, so it's really incredible. And I think it's great that you touched on this multidisciplinary approach to the question. And I think just scholarship in general, that you cannot just look at it from a legalistic of like, oh, we're talking about, I'm trying to address the issue of the lack of regulation. Therefore, it should, purely just be a legalistic, academic project, no, or like research project or inquiry, legalistic inquiry. Society is formed by different isms and sciences, and I think it's so important that we draw from these different things for us to have a fuller and more complete picture of it. And that conversation, and thank you for sharing how you said you have nurtured your own intellectual curiosity, that you said you were self-taught, and I couldn't have but chuckle when you said your dad influenced you in terms of him being a politics and enthusiast, and constantly talking about and following the news, etc. Tell me you have an African dad without telling me you have an African dad. Like, when it's time to watch the news, forget about the cartoon or the show. It's time to watch the news. Like, either get on the program or, it's just you're just gonna be miserable for the for the rest of
Literally.
your life. But exactly that intellectual curiosity of reading widely, not just reading for necessity, just because, oh, I'm Zoe, I'm Zainab, and so I'm a law student, hence I should only just read law. I am a medical student here, so I should just read, medical books. I am, a finance student. And it's so, because it makes no sense, because, we're very much a part of society. We live in this world, which is so dynamic, and there's so many different things at play. But just that curiosity, that intellectual curiosity, do you have a recommendation that you have, like 5 things that you live by that you could share?
5 is
Okay, you
that's a
know
lot
what?
of
Let's say 3 things.
now I'm like trying to think of things. Oh, that's a good question, Zainab. I should ask me before I came.
You know what?
I'll think of something deep and profound and
I
philosophical.
promise you. It's not we're not gonna hold you to be like, Zoe, this is what you said you live by, and we meet you
Mm,
tomorrow, and if your answer changes tomorrow, that's great. It means you're
yeah,
growing, you're responsive.
like show up authentically, show up as yourself in your life, in your relationships, in your education, in your career, and whatever you have going on. I think I would just like encourage people to show up. I think in this conversation, we've, spent a lot of time talking about, always having to explain ourselves or justify ourselves. Um, yeah, so in those things, like they may be discouraging, they may be disappointing, but always show up. Like show up as yourself. Whatever that means to you, I would encourage you to show up. And then also, I think another thing is you don't necessarily have to be the most intelligent, the brightest, the smartest, but if you have a passion, be passionate about something. Um, and yeah, let that passion, spur you on. Let that passion, let that fire within you, that zeal, like spur you on to whatever avenue of life you might end up in. I think I would encourage people to like broaden your worldview. Like the world is so big. There's so many people like in the globe for you. Like there's so many things to discover. Like don't, like Zainab was saying, don't box yourself in or cut yourself short. Don't sell yourself short as well. Seek to make connections, seek to explore different cultures, read different things, listen to music from different genres, like just expand yourself. I think one thing that I used to always do, Zainab, was like restrict myself. I
Mm.
was even talking to Wandile about this
Yes.
the other day. As a PhD student, we're always like, we have a PhD to write to finish. We can't, go for that job or go for that opportunity because we have to do this. And then obviously we want to succeed, we want to pass, we want to submit our thesis, but there's so
Mhm.
many things that we stop ourselves from doing because of one stage of our life. And
Wow.
you can be a holistic human being. You don't have to set aside a part of yourself to
Mhm.
pursue another thing. That's why I'm saying show up in whatever area of your life you need to show up in. So for me, at this point, I'm going to be, in the writing up stage of my thesis. I'm really like interested in looking at different opportunities in terms of my career, not necessarily in academia, like branching out to consulting, branching out to different even government and stuff like that.
Yes.
Just like expand yourself. You don't have to box yourself in. And I have a very type A personality. I'm a very
Mhm.
like this is black and white, like this is the way it is. But even in me, not necessarily passing the first year of my PhD, I saw that life isn't linear. It's going to
Mm.
take you to places that you never thought were possible, and to
And it didn't
enjoy.
define you or your future. Mm.
Exactly. Enjoy the ride, enjoy the experience, and you're going to come out the other end a more wholesome human being, a better human being than you were when you started. Um, so yeah, that's all I have to say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. I I know, I mean, wow, honestly, that almost feels like a personal message to myself. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Truly, whatever
Thank
it is
you.
that moved you. You know, I noticed so as a Muslim person, in Islam we say no, nothing happens except that which God has willed, and truly, the sharing and this conversation literally just felt like how our life experiences, like your life experiences, so mirrored in my own, and just like so much of what you were sharing, I was just like, I mentioned this earlier, of like, oh my gosh, same, and oftentimes we sit with these questions and these concerns, sometimes thinking that, like we live these extremely unique life experiences, when
Yeah.
truly the human, like if only we shared more, if only we spoke to one another more, you realize how 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 common the human experience is. Like we really, there is no, I know it's like a thing on Instagram right now where people are like, oh my gosh, nothing is unique. Like there's no unique experience out there. Like someone will often create content or make a video of how, they also do the same thing or have gone through or are going through a similar thing as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's so important in a world right now where we are inundated with like perfection, of showing up perfectly, of showing up in a specific way, and with the mental health crisis as well at the moment. I think these conversations are so important. So thank you, and
Really.
thank God as well that for this meeting, for bringing us together, and for the sharing that you've given here and you've shared. And yeah, I really appreciate it, and thank you, and God bless you, man.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. And you're so right in terms of like sharing, like even sharing your challenges, sharing your failures, sharing your achievements, just speaking up. I think that's one thing that even this podcast has given me an opportunity to do. Like, I'm a very reserved person. I'm a very closed off person, but I feel like I'm learning more and more that like someone somewhere can resonate with your experiences. They can learn from you, they can offer you advice, they can help you. So this, I feel like this platform is going to do amazing things. And I feel honored that I'm your first guest. And I, like, when I met you, remember I told you that you're a brilliant person and you're gonna do brilliant things. And I'm just really pleased to, be at the beginning of that journey. And I believe that your star is gonna shine brighter and brighter. So thank you so much, Zaina.
Thank you for your kind words, Zoe, and thank you for your time and just your grace. And honestly, this couldn't have been any more perfect. So I'm just like, no, you're leaving soon. I'm so sad. And you know what? We need to meet outside of the podcast
For sure, for
and
sure.
catch up, because this clearly is just like so much we have in common. And yeah, it's just great. Thank you. Thank you so much.